Hey guys, tonight we begin in the hushed corners of a desert land where the sky stretches so far it almost hums. You're standing at the edge of a palace, not the grand kind with soldiers and noise, but a quiet one, soft with age, rimmed with sand, and humming with secrets. There's a cool breeze, even though the earth still holds the warmth of the day. Somewhere nearby, incense burns. And the strangest part, the king of this land is not inside. Instead, you see him walking slowly toward a small grove of trees. Beyond the stone walls, barefoot, robed in plain cotton, and carrying nothing but a folded blanket and a small wooden bowl. The ground crackles softly under his steps. No guards follow. No servants bow. He's the kind of king who doesn't look like a king, more like someone who borrowed the role just to see how lightly he could wear it. You probably won't survive the madness of modern life with your peace intact unless you discover something like what he's found. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere far or close, I'd love to know where you're drifting off from and what time it is as you begin to slow down. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit quietly on the edge of the path as the king lays his blanket beneath the branches. He checks the sky, not for danger, but perhaps for moonlight, and sits. His shoulders rise and fall in a slow rhythm. The night insects begin their song. The king, as you learn, never sleeps in his palace. Each evening, he walks into the open air, no matter the season, and lies down beneath the same tree. It is not for punishment. It is not tradition. It is choice. Years ago, he explains, with a warm glance, your way he once tried to sleep in a bed layered in silk. That first night, he dreamt of drowning in softness. The second, of being crushed by his own crown. And by the third, he no longer wanted dreams like those. He says a throne is heavy. A tree has no need for thrones. The king once had everything banquets with 30 courses, mirrors polished until they forgot they were glass, and 1,000 voices trying to sound like flattery. But he also had headaches, rage that came from nowhere, sleepless nights despite all the perfumes, and a feeling just under his ribs that something vital was missing. One day, as he wandered beyond the palace to escape a feast prepared in his honor, he saw an old farmer lying under a tree, mouth slightly open, snoring like a breeze in an empty jug. His face was sun-darkened, his tunic stained, but the peace on him glowed brighter than any royal gem. That night, the king returned without guards, without slippers, and without permission. He tried lying beneath that same tree. He stayed awake the whole night, but not from fear. He said, "I was listening to what the world sounds like when it forgets me." That first night was the beginning of a new reign. Not the one sung by official poets, but the quiet reign of someone who rules their own heart. The Buddha once said, "Just as a candle cannot burn without fire, men cannot live without a spiritual life." The king repeats these words like a lullaby. He believes real kingship begins only after one has bowed to silence. As the night deepens, the stars press closer. He points to one near the horizon and tells you a simple story. There was once a king not unlike himself who ruled with cruelty and gold. One day, a quiet monk wandered into his court, bowed, and asked for a single night's lodging. The king laughed and said, "This is my palace. I don't share." The monk smiled and replied, "Oh, I thought this was an inn. Many have passed through, none have stayed." Then he walked away. That night, the cruel king could not sleep. He paced the marble floors. He sat on the edge of his bed, haunted by the monk's words. By dawn, he gave away his crown. The tale ends like mist. You notice how the king's voice never forces meaning. It just offers it like a cup of cool water placed on a windowsill. You can sip it or let it sit. The tree above rustles gently. A leaf lets go. It spirals once, twice, then lands silently on the king's shoulder. He doesn't brush it off. He smiles. So tonight, you wonder, what have you made heavier than it needs to be? Could it be the schedule that never ends? The old resentment that still bites? The fear of being unworthy if you stop for too long? The king seems to live as if every burden can be unwrapped, softened, and offered back to the earth. That even a crown must return to soil. There is no sermon, no conclusion. Just this image, a king curled beneath a tree, with the moon watching over him like an old friend. He exhales once slowly. You match his breath. The wind settles, and for now, that's enough. The night settles around you like a soft wool cloak. The stars, high and unconcerned, shimmer above the king's tree as he reaches for his small wooden bowl. The ground is still warm from the day, and you can hear the faint scuttling of a beetle in the dust. You sit beside him, now, knees drawn up, unsure if you're supposed to speak. But he doesn't seem to need conversation. He simply opens a cloth bundle tied with twine, revealing a bit of flat bread, some dates, and a pinch of lentils in a leaf. There are no servants, no royal spread, just the sound of chewing slow and peaceful. You half expect him to offer you some he doesn't. Not because he's rude, but because he knows you're not hungry. You're full of something else entirely. Tension maybe, or noise from your day. He knows this kind of hunger too, the kind that can't be eased with food. The breeze shifts gently, lifting the scent of warm bark and old earth. Somewhere in the branches, an owl stirs, and the king, wiping his fingers on his robe, speaks not to fill the silence, but as if he's sharing part of the silence itself. He says, "Once there was a monk who wandered into a village during a famine. The people were thin, their eyes sunken, like wells, long dry. Still, the monk sat under a tree and meditated, smiling softly, as if he had just eaten. A woman, angry and hungry, shouted at him, 'What are you so peaceful for? Do you not feel hunger, like us?' The monk opened his bowl. Inside was a single grain of rice, dry and cracked. He placed it in his mouth and chewed it 30 times. He bowed to her and said, 'Hunger is real, but suffering is what I add to it.' You think about that for a while." The king says nothing more. He just leans back his head against the tree. You follow his gaze to the moon, remembering how your day was filled with screens, with checking and double-checking. You ate, yes, but you didn't taste much. The king's meals, you notice, are not just about nourishment. They are rituals, movements to remind him that he's not above the world, not separate from it. A king eating beneath a tree is not pretending to be poor. He is remembering that he is ultimately human. He tells you another story, this one softer than the first. Once long ago, he begins, a boy asked his grandfather, "What made a meal sacred?" The old man didn't answer. Instead, he took the boy into the fields. They walked for hours in the sun, picking bitter herbs and wild onions. By the time they returned, their feet were blistered and their hands scratched. Then the grandfather placed a single bowl of rice between them. The boy hesitated. "Shouldn't we have more after so much work?" The old man smiled and said, "The work is what made this sacred, not the amount." A moment later, the king takes a sip of water from a metal flask. He offers it to you. This time, you accept. It's lukewarm and faintly sweet, like it's been infused with something herbal, though you can't place it. You think back on your last meal, not just what it was, but how it was. Were you rushing, scrolling, standing in a kitchen doorway? Maybe it wasn't the food that was unsatisfying. It was the attention. The Buddha once said, "Health is the greatest gift contentment, the greatest wealth faithfulness, the best relationship. You turn the words over slowly in your mind, like smooth stones in a pocket. The king scratches at the earth beside him with a stick, drawing lazy circles in the dust. He looks toward the village lights in the distance, soft little glows like fireflies that forgot to sleep. He says, most people think they need more, but what they really crave is presence. You watch the wind toy with his hair. His robes shift against his body with the same ease that leaves flutter against branches. Nothing about him clings, not even the title of king. He reaches down and presses his palm to the soil beside him, holding it there for a long breath. You try the same. The earth is dry, cool now. It feels strangely solid, like something ancient and wise. You both sit like that for a while, palms flat, breaths slow, until your thoughts quiet. Then, without lifting his hand, the king speaks again. A man once asked a wise woman, "What does it mean to be rich?" She pointed to a bowl of water and said, "Drink, and if you can still name what you lack, after you are not yet rich." The tale hangs in the night, quiet and true. A rustle behind you makes you turn, but it's just a squirrel, sleepy-eyed and annoyed. You disturbed its night walk. The king chuckles softly. Even the squirrels keep better boundaries than most rulers, he says with a wink. You laugh because it's true. And suddenly, you're aware of how many hours you've given away to things that never laughed back, to calendars, to worries, to thinking that the more you did, the more you'd become. Have you tasted your own life? The king asks gently. Or just chewed it in passing? It's not judgment. It's an invitation. There's a lesson here, but it doesn't come wrapped in a conclusion. It just lingers like steam from warm tea, asking quietly, "Are you hungry for the right things?" You lie back beside the king, your head resting on your arm, the tree's roots gently pressing into your side. The stars seem a little closer now. The wind hushes its way through the leaves like a lullaby for wanderers. And beneath it all, the king breathes evenly. A man who has ruled an entire kingdom and chosen night after night a pillow of leaves instead. Dawn hasn't broken yet, but the sky has softened, trading its deep black for a smoky indigo. The tree stretches upward, silhouetted against the early hush, and beside you, the king stirs, not because he's restless, but because he always wakes before the sun. You're not sure if he slept. He might have just been breathing, listening. Still, as he folds his blanket with simple care, he says, "This bowl has traveled more miles than I have." He lifts it with both hands, turning it slowly in the morning light. The wood is worn smooth, the edges rounded from years of touch. There's something sacred in its ordinariness, like it's carried more than just meals. It has carried silence, hunger offering. He speaks softly now, almost like reciting a memory rather than telling a story. There was a monk once older than the trees, they said. He had nothing but a robe and a bowl. One evening, as the wind howled through his cave and he hadn't eaten in 3 days, he saw a child stealing rice from a farmer's basket. The monk stepped forward, bowed to the child, and said, "You must be hungrier than I am. Would you take what's in my bowl instead?" The child's eyes, wide, took the bowl, only to find it empty. Still, he held it close, tears in his eyes. "It feels like a gift," he said. The king looks down at his bowl. Sometimes the offering is the space we make, not the thing we fill it with. You don't reply, not out of politeness, but because your breath has gone still, as if waiting for something to settle. He walks a few slow steps to the stream that winds past the grove and kneels. With his hands, he cups a little water, pours it into the bowl, and then drinks. Nothing wasted. No ceremony yet. Somehow it feels like one. The Buddha once said, "As rain falls equally on the just and unjust, do not burden your heart with judgments, but let your kindness fall like rain." You feel that now in the way the king lets the bowl dry, naturally, resting it gently beside him. There's no cloth, no polish. The bowl doesn't need to shine. It just needs to serve. And suddenly you wonder, what in your life have you tried too hard to shine? When all it wanted was to be held, he leads you through the woods, now barefoot again. The path is soft with pine needles, and the morning birds have begun to trade secrets. You think of your shoes rigid, loud, and tucked by the palace wall, and you wonder how many layers you wear daily that muffle your own being. The king pauses at a clearing where wild flowers bloom even in the chill. "This is where I come when my thoughts try to speak too loudly," he says. Here they realize they're not the only voice. And then he tells you about the thought that once nearly ruled him. Years ago, he begins before I slept under trees. I had a day full of anger. An advisor betrayed a trust. A neighboring ruler threatened war. And by evening, I found myself gripping a goblet so tightly it cracked in my hand. My fingers bled, but I didn't even feel it. I only remember the rage. That night, I held my bowl, this same one, and thought of throwing it across the room. But I didn't. I looked into it instead. His gaze meets yours, still calm. It reflected my face back to me. Not angry, not broken, just tired. And in that quiet reflection, I met the part of me that wasn't mad at all, just sad and tight and afraid. He crouches and draws a circle in the soil with a stick. Since then, I've used this bowl for something else too, collecting thoughts. When one gets loud, I imagine placing it in the bowl, not judging it, not denying it, just letting it sit. Sometimes it overflows. That's okay too. That means it's time to let something go. The story doesn't come with a grand ending, but it doesn't need one. You stand quietly, breathing in the meadow's cool scent, hearing birds you can't name, noticing the small wind press against your sleeves. The king looks at you, and there's a soft grin beneath his words. You know, people assume kings are always thinking, planning. But most days, I'm just practicing being a bowl, empty enough to receive whatever comes. You laugh gently, not because it's funny, but because it's true. And true things often sneak out as laughter first. The king plucks a small yellow flower from near his foot, holds it to the sun, and then places it in the bowl. The gesture is so light, so slow, it feels like prayer. You find yourself asking, what am I full of that I never meant to carry? Anxiety, deadlines, comparisons, worry about whether you're doing it right. The king doesn't ask you to change anything. He just keeps walking. And so you follow. Back near the grove, he places the bowl on a flat stone and leaves it there. No words, no claim. Just a bowl catching the morning breeze. You realize it might sit there for days or moments or until the next curious creature knocks it over. That's all right. As you settle onto the ground again, the sun finally breaks the horizon, soft, round, golden as a coin, but not something to be pocketed, just seen. You close your eyes. There is a slight chill in the air, but it doesn't bite. It just reminds you you're alive, and for now, that is enough. The sun is higher now, warming the tops of the trees and painting golden streaks across the forest floor. Birds dart in and out of the branches, their wings like little flickers of light. You walk behind the king as he makes his way along a winding path toward a village square. It's still early, and the villagers are only just beginning to stir. Brooms sweeping doorways, kettles singing, dogs yawning, wider than necessary. The king moves slowly, greeting each person with the same bow, the same eyes that look without comparison. You notice something unusual. He doesn't speak first. He waits. He listens. And when he does speak, it's never to give an answer, but to invite a question. As you pass a stone well in the village center, a woman with heavy shoulders and a quiet gaze greets the king with a hesitant smile. Behind her stands her son, no older than 10, carrying a small broom. He sweeps like it's a sacred duty, each movement careful and precise. The king watches him for a while, then nods approvingly and moves on. But as you're about to follow, the king stops you with a glance. "Did you see his face?" he asks. You pause, thinking back. The boy hadn't smiled, hadn't frowned, just swept. "He is already learning the weight of the world," the king says softly, "but not its joy." He kneels, drawing a line in the dirt with his finger. "Once, I had a servant who never laughed. For years, he followed me through every corridor, every battle, every speech. Always quiet, always efficient, but never once did he smile. One day, I asked him why. He said, 'Smiling is for those who have nothing left to fear.'" The king's finger pauses at the end of the line he drew. And so, I gave him a task. I told him, "Each day, you must find one thing that surprises you. Not something grand, just unexpected." The servant began to change, slowly. One day, he marveled at a frog sitting on a statue's head. Another day, he noticed how the moonlight painted the stable doors silver. And then, one morning, as he handed the king a scroll, he chuckled under his breath. The king asked him what was funny. The servant simply said, "The ink smells like cinnamon." It wasn't a joke. It wasn't even funny, really. But something had softened inside him. And from that moment on, he began to smile. Not because he was told to, but because something inside had remembered how. The king stands now, brushing the dirt from his knees. We can perform all the right tasks, live all the proper roles, and still forget our own aliveness. The Buddha once said, "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." But what if your thoughts have forgotten how to laugh? You walk with the king a little further into the market square, where a group of children are chasing a goose, who it seems is more dignified than amused. The goose waddles in great frustration as the children squeal and scatter. But even in the chaos, there's a rhythm, a joy, a messiness that feels holy. The king watches with a wide smile, and you realize his laughter is quiet, almost invisible, like a breeze that lifts the edges of a curtain without drawing attention to itself. Joy, he says, does not need to shout. It only needs to be noticed. You look around. There's the smell of dough baking, the sound of two old women bargaining gently over a basket of figs, a boy with a missing tooth offering a flower to a donkey. All of it so easy to miss, and yet so full of life. And still, you wonder, when did your life become so serious? There's nothing wrong with caring deeply. The king certainly does. But you can tell he's discovered something more powerful than solemnity, something quieter than purpose. He's found delight. As the morning stretches on, the king stops by a tea vendor. The cups are mismatched, chipped, held together with little strip of copper wire. The tea is poured without ceremony, but the king inhales the steam like it's perfume. He says to the vendor, "Still brewing the same story." The man laughs and replies, "Only changing the ending now and then." The two drink without words. You are offered a cup. The tea tastes of mint and ash, and something faintly sweet, like it remembers a flower that once grew near it. You sip slowly. The king leans close and whispers, "You don't need a reason to smile. Just a moment, you don't resist." And you realize there have been many such moments today already. Quiet ones, small ones. A crack of light between bricks, a flutter of laughter, a hand not clenched. You think of the servant again, the one who forgot how to smile. You wonder, how many servants live inside you, little tired selves who just need permission to be surprised again? So you ask yourself, gently, is effort always the path? Or is wonder sometimes enough? The market begins to quiet as the sun climbs higher. The villagers return to their homes, their fields, their routines. The king finishes his tea, sets the cup down, and simply begins to walk again. No urgency, no grand direction, just presence, and you, a little lighter, follow. The road leading out of the village is dusted with morning gold, the kind of light that makes even weeds shimmer like sacred things. You and the king walk slowly, your feet brushing against the dry grass, your shadows long and lean across the earth. There's something about the silence now that feels different, not empty, but full, like a bowl waiting to be filled. Or maybe like it's already full and you're only just noticing. The king glances upward. The sky is open and clear, but he tilts his head as if listening for something. You follow his gaze, but all you see are clouds stitched along the edges of the horizon, delicate and soft. He smiles. "Rain's coming." You raise an eyebrow. It seems unlikely. He keeps walking. By the time you've reached the edge of the palace gardens, just a gentle breath beyond the last row of olive trees, the clouds have gathered with more confidence. Their bellies are heavier now, their shadows pooling softly over the earth. The air thickens. Birds grow quiet. The first drop falls on your wrist. It is cool. Then another on your neck. Then a sudden downpour, like a sigh from the heavens. People scatter. Servants rush to draw cloths over fruit carts. Palace guards pull hoods over their heads. You instinctively look toward the marble steps of the palace for shelter. But the king, he walks away from it. into the center of the garden, past the covered colonnades, past the dry safety of the awnings, out into the storm, and you, soaked and stunned, follow. The rain falls harder, the kind that soaks in seconds, flattening your hair, tracing rivulets down your back. The king stands with his arms open, his robes clinging to his frame, and his face tilted toward the sky, not in defiance, but in welcome. He says softly, "This is when the earth breathes out." Then he kneels in the muddy grass, and you kneel too, the wet ground squishing under your knees. It's cold, but strangely, it feels right. He begins to hum. A low, slow tone, not quite melody, not quite chant, just breath and sound woven into the rhythm of falling rain. You close your eyes, and for a moment, everything else disappears, except this: the rain, the king, the breath. He speaks quietly now. When I was a boy, I used to be terrified of storms. I thought they were punishment, loud, angry things that split trees and broke roofs. But then an old gardener, nearly blind, told me a secret. You glance over. He said, "Child, the storm does not come to destroy. It comes to teach us how to stand wet and unafraid." He smiles again, not proudly, but like someone remembering a dear friend. You both remain in the rain, soaked to the skin, until the clouds begin to drift and the light filters back in threads. A few servants approach cautiously, holding towels and dry robes. The king waves them away gently, not out of dismissal, but gratitude. He turns to you and says, "There's no wisdom in staying dry all your life." The Buddha once said, "You can only lose what you cling to." And here in this soaked garden, you realize how often you've clung to control, to planning the day just right, to shielding yourself from even gentle discomfort, all the while perhaps missing the beauty that's only revealed in surrender. A memory surfaces, one of your own. You in traffic, staring at your phone, frustrated by delay. Now you wonder, what if that moment, too, had been a kind of rain? Back beneath the tree hours later, the king wraps himself in a dry shawl. He hands you a thin cotton blanket, the kind that feels like it's been warmed by years. You both sit again, the earth still damp beneath you, steam rising faintly where the sun touches the grass. He tells one more story. There was once a woman, he says, who lived at the edge of a river. Each time it rained, the river rose and threatened her home. But she refused to move. One day, a neighbor asked why she stayed. She replied, "Because the river never lies. It tells me when it is full. People rarely do." He chuckles softly and adds, "Nature doesn't pretend. It reveals." You sip tea now, simple and strong, served from a clay pot that still holds the scent of smoke. Around you, the leaves drip quietly, releasing their own small songs. A bird shakes itself dry on a branch. Somewhere nearby, someone laughs, a child maybe. So you ask yourself, what have I avoided feeling? Just to stay comfortable. Sometimes the storm is not outside. It's inside. And maybe the only way through it isn't to run, but to step into it barefoot and greet it with open arms. The king breathes deeply and leans back against the tree trunk, his eyes half closed. Every drop that touches you, he says, reminds you that you're not made of glass. You're made of sky and water and dust. And none of those things break. You sit with that truth, letting it soak in like rain into thirsty ground. And you don't mind being a little wet anymore. Later that day, as the sun climbs higher and dries the edges of the world, the king invites you to walk with him through a quieter part of the palace grounds. Not the halls filled with polished stone and carved lions, but a little corner garden, half forgotten, soft with moss, shaded by trees whose roots have lifted bricks from beneath. There's a narrow path that winds between crumbling columns. Ferns brush your arms. Lichen blooms on old stone like soft, silent paint. The king moves slower here. He doesn't speak at first. It's as if this place deserves more listening than words. Then he stops beside a shallow alcove in the wall. You wouldn't have noticed it unless you were looking for nothing in particular. Inside the niche is a mirror, cracked. The glass has aged to a smoky hue. You step closer, expecting to see your face, but all you see is blur and light. It distorts your reflection, softens your features until you look less like yourself and more like a suggestion of a person. The king traces the crack with his fingertip. When I was a boy, he says, I came here to hide. My father had scolded me for dropping a ceremonial scroll. I was afraid not of punishment, but of shame. I sat here for hours alone, watching my face in this mirror. He smiles faintly, like remembering both the sting and the softness. And I remember the moment clearly. The sun hit just right, and I saw my face slip, not in a scary way. It was just not fixed. I realized the mirror wasn't broken. I was. You blink, not because you don't understand, but because you do. Somewhere inside you, you recognize the same feeling. The fear of not holding your shape, of being seen as incomplete. The king continues. So many spend their lives polishing their reflection, seeking to appear whole, certain admirable. But real wholeness, he says gently, is when you can sit calmly with your own brokenness and smile. He crouches down and clears away a few fallen leaves from the stone below. Beneath them, words are carved, worn faint with time. You have to lean close to read them, to see clearly cloud the water. The Buddha once said, "It is better to conquer yourself than to win 1,000 battles." But what if the part of you you're fighting doesn't need conquering? Just kindness. The king picks up a small stone and tosses it gently into a nearby basin. The water ripples, then settles. This mirror reminds me what I see changes. But the one who sees, if quiet enough, is always there. He looks at you. What do you see in your reflection when no one else is around to praise or judge you? It's not a question meant to be answered quickly. You walk on. The palace walls grow quieter here. Moss thickens. An old sandalwood bench leans slightly to the side. This is a forgotten wing, and yet the king seems to know every creak, every broken tile. He touches a low beam carved with images of clouds and birds. We once stored ceremonial cloaks here, he says. Hundreds of them. Robes made with threads of gold, so stiff with embroidery they couldn't bend. He chuckles softly. Funny how garments made for reverence can be so uncomfortable. There's a pause, and then he adds, "People do this with their personalities too. We stitch together an image, dutiful, brave, clever, spiritual, and wear it until it itches. But we can't take it off because we fear being seen without it." He stops beside a low window, just a square of lattice and vine. Sunlight spills through, catching dust in its fingers. Sometimes, he says, we need to see ourselves not as statues, but as shadows on the wall. Soft, moving, not fixed, not final. You think again of the mirror, of your own reflection, the one you try to shape each day through actions, speech, online personas, even silence. But have you ever really sat with yourself without adjusting, without improving? Just sat and watched. You walk a little more. The king pauses again near a tree that's grown so large, its roots have buckled the foundation beneath it. He rests his hand on its bark, textured like wisdom itself. This tree, he says, grew through marble. It didn't ask permission. You smile. He closes his eyes for a moment and breathes in. And you realize he's not just remembering. He's communing. He opens his eyes and says, "When the mirror cracked, I thought I was broken. But the truth is, sometimes the crack lets in the real light, not the one shaped by performance or title, but the one that simply is." You sit down beneath the tree with him, and everything is quiet. The palace is close yet far. You could be anywhere, so you ask yourself gently, who am I when I stop trying to be anything at all. There's no answer in words, but there is an answer in the breath and in the warmth of the sun on your skin, and in the feeling of the earth beneath your palms, and in the memory of that cracked mirror still holding the shape of light. The air has turned lighter, and the sun now filters through the trees in warm dapples, softening everything it touches. You and the king are still beneath that sprawling tree, whose roots broke marble without apology. He is humming again, just slightly, not quite a melody, just a comfort sound, the kind someone makes when they feel completely at ease with the silence. You feel it too, that strange, unfamiliar lightness, like something heavy inside you has quietly unlatched. Then the king opens his eyes and says, "A child once asked me a question I still haven't answered." He's looking past you, now somewhere far, but not in distance, in time. She tugged on my robe one morning, no taller than my hip, and asked, "What's smaller than anger?" He smiles gently, the kind of smile that makes you feel like a cup being filled slowly with warm tea. "I didn't know what to say," he admits, "but I've been thinking about it ever since." He pulls a small pouch from his sash and empties it slowly into his palm. In it is a single feather, fine and gray, no larger than a child's finger. He places it on your palm. "This is from a sparrow," he says, "a little bird who once saved a mountain." You blink. You didn't mishear, but you wait, curious. He begins the tale. "There was once a mountain so vast and proud that it boasted day and night to the skies. I am eternal. I am unmoving. I am untouched by time." One day, a tiny sparrow built its nest in a crevice near the peak. Each morning, she would fly to the valley, pick up a grain of soil in her beak, and carry it away. You furrow your brow slightly. He notices and nods. Just one grain. Every day. For years, the mountain laughed. "What do you think you're doing, little bird?" The sparrow replied, "I'm moving you." The mountain rumbled with laughter. "Foolish creature, you are too small." But the sparrow kept going. Every single day, a grain at a time. The king pauses and looks at you. "What's smaller than anger?" he asks again. You glance down at the feather. It weighs almost nothing, but now it feels like a key or a seed. "Patience," he says, finally. "Kindness. The smallest things often move what seems immovable." The Buddha once said, "A jug fills drop by drop." And maybe that's the lesson hidden here. Not all change must roar. Some begins with the quiet persistence of a sparrow, willing to act without applause. You sit in silence for a while. The king watches the wind play with the leaves. His face is peaceful, almost boyish now. You wonder how often people think peace looks like stillness, when sometimes it's just gentle repetition, a quiet feather, a kind gesture, a breath before speaking. He begins again. When I was younger, I used to rage, he admits softly. Not in public. No. My anger wore silks. It whispered behind locked doors. It burned just beneath the skin, hidden by titles and control. He shakes his head gently. Then, one morning, after a night of restless pacing, I walked alone to the forest. I wanted to break something. I wanted to shout. But instead, I saw a sparrow dipping her beak into a puddle, then lifting her wings and flitting to a nearby branch. She did it again and again. I watched her for an hour. She was bathing. He laughs quietly in a puddle smaller than a coin. That image stayed with him. It lives with him still. Even small joy, he says, can clean something inside you. You tuck the feather into your pocket. It's soft. It's so light, you almost forget it's there. But now you understand. That's the point. Sometimes the thing that changes everything doesn't announce itself. It's small, steady, almost invisible. You walk with the king back along the trail, and the trees whisper over your head like old friends sharing gossip with the wind. As you walk, you begin to notice other small things. A curled vine creeping between two stones, an ant carrying a crumb twice its size, a single blossom blooming out of season, and you realize so much of the world lives its quiet truth without needing to be noticed. The king touches a bark-stripped branch and says, "Some of the strongest trees never bloom. They grow inward." You glance at your hands, your feet, your breath. You think about how much effort you've poured into being seen, acknowledged, understood. And now you wonder, what would it feel like to simply be, to live like the sparrow, moving mountains one grain at a time, not for glory, but because it is the way. The king's final words for the day drift out like a breeze through pine needles. Anger may be loud, but softness travels further. And as the evening edges in and the sky melts into amber, you think perhaps the smallest thing inside you, the quiet hope, the patient kindness, the breath you forgot to notice, might just be the most powerful. Evening returns slowly, like tea steeping in warm water. The shadows grow longer, stretching out across the village paths, and the scent of wood smoke begins to curl into the air. You follow the king into a part of the town you haven't visited before, an older road where the stones are uneven and the signs are hand-painted. Faded prayers are etched into the doorways. Lanterns swing lazily on ropes, catching the last golden rays. Here the air smells different. Not bad, just more worn. Like time lingers a little longer in this part of the village. The king leads you to a small tea house tucked between two stone homes. Its roof sags gently, and the doorway is low enough that he has to duck to enter. Inside, the air is warm and dim. A fire crackles behind a woven screen. The shelves are crowded with jars, clay pots, and bundles of dried herbs tied with string. The owner, a woman with graying hair tied back with a strip of linen, greets the king with a nod, but no words. She seems tired in a way that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from too many days spent waiting for something to change. The king sits cross-legged on a cushion near the hearth. You follow, brushing dust from your knees. The woman prepares tea with mechanical precision. Her movements are practiced exact, but without joy. The kind of repetition that feels more like endurance than tradition. When she serves the tea, she doesn't look up. You sip and stop. The taste is strange, not bitter, not spoiled, just hollow, like something was left out. It's warm, but there's no soul in it. It tastes like going through the motions. The king drinks quietly, but you notice his eyes watching her gently, not critically, not judgmentally, just present. After a few moments, he speaks softly. You used to add jasmine. The woman stiffens slightly. Too costly now. The king nods. He doesn't argue. He just sets his cup down and says, "May I make the next pot?" She raises an eyebrow, but steps aside. The king moves slowly, without touching much, only what's needed. He selects a handful of leaves. From one jar, a sprig of dry citrus peel from another. Then, from a pouch he keeps tucked in his sash, he pulls a single crushed petal of jasmine. He smiles. I only use this when I forget how things should feel. He brews the tea with the care of someone tucking in a child for sleep. His movements are fluid, gentle, unhurried. When he pours the tea into the same simple cups, the aroma fills the little room like a memory returning home. You sip again, and it's real. Not because it's the best tea you've ever had, but because it tastes like attention, like someone cared enough to be present with it. The woman drinks from her own cup and blinks, as if noticing something she'd long stopped expecting to find. The king says, "It's not the jasmine, it's the moment." The Buddha once said, "Drink your tea slowly and reverently, as if it is the axis on which the world, earth revolves slowly, evenly, without rushing toward the future." You think about how often you've rushed through things meant to nourish you. Meals, conversations, even your own breath. Sometimes the world teaches you to be efficient, but tea asks you to arrive. The woman finally speaks again, softer now. "I stopped tasting it years ago." The king bows his head. That's easy to do. We lose the thread and think the whole cloth is ruined. He reaches into a pocket and pulls out a tiny stone. He places it on the wooden counter. "What's this?" she asks. "A memory stone," he replies. "Something small, smooth, and solid. Whenever I forget what matters, I hold it until I remember." The woman touches the stone lightly with her fingertip. She doesn't say anything more, but you notice the way her shoulders settle just slightly, like something inside her is being gently put back down. You sip again, and it's like the tea is whispering, "This is enough. Right now. Just this." You sit with the warmth in your hands and the silence between sips and the quiet company of people who are learning again how to be present with something simple. The king looks to you and says, "When you can make tea with love, you can do anything with peace." Outside, the night deepens. The village dims. Stars begin to peek through the folds of the sky. You rise, thank the woman, and follow the king back onto the cobblestone road. You pass houses with open windows. Inside, you catch glimpses of lives unfolding. Someone folding a blanket, a child brushing her hair, a man lighting a single candle before kneeling in prayer. Nothing flashy, just life being lived. You feel the tea still warming your chest. The king stops beneath a tree where lanterns sway their light soft as breath. He turns to you and asks, "When was the last time you tasted what you were doing?" You don't answer aloud, but inside, something shifts. A new kind of hunger arises, not for food or achievement, but for presence, for letting simple things feel sacred again. Even tea, even this breath, even now. Night folds fully around you now, like a thick velvet robe drawn across the shoulders of the sky. The stars blink slowly, not in a rush, as if they know they'll be here long after the fires go out and the tea cools. You and the king walk in silence, your footsteps soft against the dirt road. Every so often, he pauses, not to say something, but just to look at a tree, a lantern, a sleeping dog curled near a doorstep. He doesn't name these things. He just notices them. And somehow, that feels more respectful. You come to a small gate near the edge of the village. Beyond it lies a hut, low to the ground and quiet. No guards, no fanfare, just a thin stream of smoke curling from the chimney. The king touches the gate lightly before opening it. His voice drops to a whisper. "There's someone here I want you to meet." Inside the hut, lit by a single oil lamp, a man sits cross-legged on a straw mat. His hair is tangled at the ends. His shoulders are narrow, but his presence fills the room like heat from a flame. He looks up slowly and smiles at the king, not with reverence, not with formality, but like one wave greeting another. You know immediately this is someone who's lived through something hard and deep and didn't close off because of it. He doesn't stand to greet you. He simply gestures for you both to sit. As you lower yourself onto the mat, you notice a faded blanket nearby, carefully folded. A bowl of rice, a wooden flute, nothing else. But somehow, the room feels full. The king turns to you and begins quietly. He was once a soldier. The man smiles and shrugs. The king continues. Years ago, he returned from war with scars so deep they didn't bleed anymore, just stayed inside. I found him sitting in the river one morning, not washing, not fishing, just sitting. His armor still on, even in the water. The man chuckles softly. I thought if I could sit still long enough, the past would float away. The king looks at you. But something else happened. The man nods. I started dreaming of grass. He shifts slightly, looking at the low ceiling beams, as if remembering. I'd been surrounded by blood fire command. But the dreams, every night they were green. Soft hills, fields with no sound, just wind moving through grass. The king adds, so he came here, built this place with his hands, and every day he plants grass. Nothing else, just grass. You raise an eyebrow. The man laughs again. I know. It doesn't feed people. It doesn't shine. But it moves when the wind does. And I needed something gentle. Outside the hut, you hadn't noticed before. But beyond the window is a wide patch of green grass as far as the fence allows. Simple swaying alive. Not cropped, not arranged, just growing. You walk to the window and gaze out. The moonlight makes the blades shimmer like silver threads in a wide loom. The king comes to stand beside you. I asked him once why he didn't grow food instead. He said, because not all hunger is in the stomach. The Buddha once said, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. But what if peace also arrives from the gentleness you allow yourself after harshness? What if planting grass can be just as holy as planting rice? You sit back down. The soldier, now a gardener, picks up his wooden flute and plays. No tune, just notes, like water, dripping from a bamboo pipe. You close your eyes and let the sound wash over you. It doesn't try to impress. It just exists. The fire crackles. A moth dances around the lamp. You let your breath slow until it matches the rhythm of the flute, and you ask yourself, what would I plant if I stopped trying to be useful all the time? Maybe it's not about productivity. Maybe it's about offering something soft in a world that often forgets how to be gentle. When the music fades, the gardener bows his head, not to end a performance, but simply because it's time. The king places a hand on his shoulder, then turns and nods for you to follow. Outside, the air smells of bukel and night flowers. The breeze is cool but kind. As you walk away from the hut, you turn back once more and see the grass swaying in the dark. The king says there are wounds that don't need healing. They just need gentleness. You walk on each step quieter than the last. And in your pocket, you feel the feather from earlier light as breath. As you lie down beneath the tree, that night, your blanket pulled up around your shoulders, you picture that field of grass, endless and still. And you wonder, is it possible that rest is its own kind of service? Maybe not everything needs to be strong. Maybe peace begins in softness. The morning has stretched itself long and golden, the kind of light that slips between leaves and settles softly on your skin. You and the king return to the tree, the one with roots like old fingers pressed deep into the earth. He lowers himself onto the mossy ground as if greeting an old friend, and you do the same. The silence is comfortable now, like a blanket warmed by familiarity. He plucks a leaf from a low branch, its small, still green, soft as silk between his fingers. Sometimes, he says quietly, I think the leaf is wiser than the tree. You wait. His stories never rush. He continues. This leaf has no fear of falling. The tree doesn't ask it to stay, and the wind doesn't warn it first. He lets the leaf drift from his fingers. It spins once, twice, and lands without a sound. You both watch it settle. There was once a tree. He begins that lived on a cliff above the sea. Each season, its leaves would fall except for one. A single leaf clung to its branch, long past its time. Storms came. Winds howled. Still, it held tight. You listen closely. His voice lowers, like he's telling a sacred secret. The leaf feared it would vanish if it let go. It didn't know what came next. One day, the tree whispered, "You are not falling into nothing. You are falling into everything." The king pauses. That leaf finally let go. It danced its way to the ground, and when it touched the soil, it did not vanish. It fed the roots. You sit with that image. A leaf that didn't disappear, but transformed, became something deeper. And you wonder, what am I still holding on to? Because I fear becoming nothing. The Buddha once said, attachment is the root of suffering. But you realize now, attachment isn't only to people or things. It can also be to identities, stories, control. The king lies back, folding his arms behind his head, gazing up into the canopy. The branches above sway gently, their edges catching the breeze. Sunlight flickers through, like truth playing peekaboo. I used to control everything he says. My schedule, my people, my reputation, even how I was remembered. He chuckles. But one day, I saw a leaf fall and realized it never asked who would catch it. You look up, trying to count the leaves. Letting go, he says, isn't about giving up. It's about allowing life to carry you. He tells you another story. There was a village woman whose husband had passed and her children had grown. She was known for her sweet cakes and quiet singing. One day, she stopped baking. People asked her why. She said, "I think it's time I just sit and listen to the wind now." They were puzzled. No one sits just to listen. Not for hours, not for days, but she did. And in that stillness, something softened in the whole village. Her silence became permission. Others slowed down. The baker stopped rushing. The butcher began walking home by the long path through the meadow. People started sitting near her, not to speak, but just to be. The king turns to you, his eyes steady. Sometimes, letting go doesn't look like loss. Sometimes, it looks like becoming still enough for others to rest. You think of all the things you hold so tightly, to be useful, to be efficient, to be certain, and suddenly you wonder, is holding on really strength, or is it fear, dressed in importance? Another leaf flutters down. You watch it, land soft as breath. He tells one final tale for the morning. There was a man who carried a jug everywhere. It was heavy, even when empty. One day, a monk asked why he never set it down. The man said, "Because I've carried it so long, I don't know who I'd be without it." The monk smiled and asked, "Would you rather keep your identity or find your peace?" You look to your own hands. What are you carrying? A need to prove yourself, a worry that rest means laziness, a fear that if you stop, you'll disappear. The king stretches his arms over his head, yawns softly, and says, "We think letting go means falling. But sometimes it means finally landing." A breeze moves through the trees again. A bird calls once, then quiets. You sit back, letting your spine press into the ground, your body held by something older than thought. And slowly, you breathe out, not just air, but tension. The leaf did not cling, and it was dot. The afternoon light has softened, trading its harsh gold for something warmer, gentler. You're still under the tree. The king nearby, both of you bathed in that late day hush where everything begins to exhale. It's the time of day when even the birds seem to pause their song. The world doesn't ask anything of you right now, and you don't ask anything of it. The king slowly rises, brushing soil from his robes. He doesn't speak, just gestures for you to follow him. His steps are unhurried, like someone moving through a memory rather than a place. He leads you not back into the forest or toward the village, but into the palace. You pass through a series of narrow stone corridors, cooler here lined with carved wooden panels faded by time. The sounds of the outside world fade until all that remains is your footsteps and the occasional creak of wood beneath stone. Finally, you come to a chamber you haven't seen before. It's hidden half sunken into the earth, dimly lit by a single stained glass window high above that filters sunlight into soft pools of rose and gold. In the center of the room stands the throne. You've seen it before from afar, but never like this. Up close, it's less grand than expected. The gold leaf is flaking. The cushions are worn. One leg has been mended with twine. But it's not that which captures your attention. It's what's beneath it. The king kneels slowly, not with formality, but with tenderness, like bowing to an old friend. He lifts the edge of the rug under the throne and carefully pulls aside a small wooden panel, revealing a hollowed-out space below. Inside is a carving, faded, crude, etched directly into the stone floor. It's a simple smile, just a face with two eyes and a curved mouth, childlike, joyful, as if someone long ago wanted to leave behind a reminder of something softer, gentler than all the ceremony built above it. The king looks up at you and speaks quietly. I carved that when I was 11. You blink. He nods. Before I ever wore a crown. Before I ever gave an order. I used to sneak in here when the hall was empty. I'd crawl under the throne and sit here just to be near it. I thought power would make me feel safe. He runs a hand over the carving. But when I sat beneath it, I realized something. It wasn't the throne that felt strong. It was the space below it. It was hiding from everyone and remembering who I was without the weight. He smiles faintly. One day, I took a stick and drew that face. I was tired of pretending. The Buddha once said, "However many holy words you read, however many you speak, what good will they do you if you do not act upon them?" The king in this moment is not just telling you a story. He's showing you a truth lived, not taught. I became king before I became whole, he says. So much of my early rule was just me trying to protect the frightened boy who carved that smile. He sighs, not in regret, but in recognition. Over time, I forgot this was here. I sat on that throne for years, declaring justice, receiving praise, giving punishment, all while this smile sat beneath me, waiting. He places the panel gently back, covering the carving, as if tucking in a child. I only remembered it one day, when I dropped something, a ring, I think. It rolled under the throne, and I crawled down after it. And there it was, my first truth. He stands again, and turns to you. You ever think about what lies beneath the role you perform? You do. He walks slowly around the throne, running his hand along its back. You can sit on a throne every day of your life and still never rule your own heart. You step closer to the seat, touching it lightly. The cushion dips under your fingers. You think of all the pressure the world puts on pedestals, titles, achievements, appearances. And you wonder, what would I find beneath my own throne? Is it stillness? Fear? A forgotten smile? The king leads you out of the chamber without closing the door behind him. He doesn't look back. He doesn't need to. Back in the courtyard, the breeze picks up slightly. The shadows grow long. He pauses and glances at you. We're all born smiling, but then we learn to hide it. We trade it for seriousness, for dignity, for approval. But when you carve it somewhere secret, it waits for you. The breeze moves through the trees again, lifting the corners of his robe. His hair dances lightly, and you see, for just a breath, the boy he once was. And so you ask yourself with softness, not urgency, where did you leave your first smile? Maybe it's time to crawl beneath the noise, beneath the role, beneath the throne, to find it again. The air is changing again, cooler. Now, touched with the scent of night flowers and the distant promise of wood smoke. The sun has dipped low behind the hills, casting long golden rays that seem to slow time itself. You and the king walk side by side through the palace gates, but neither of you is heading toward the grand halls or banquet rooms. Instead, he guides you toward a simple stone courtyard near the outer edge of the palace grounds. There, seated on the worn steps, is a monk. His robe is the deep rust red of sun-baked clay. His face is lined with age, but not weariness. In fact, he looks more alive than most men you've seen, like someone who has stopped pretending they aren't made of starlight and breath. He is still, utterly still. Children have gathered nearby, tossing pebbles toward a stone wall, laughing, whispering. One of them, emboldened by the monk's silence, calls out something rude. Nothing hateful, just teasing. Another child picks it up louder this time. The group giggles. Still, the monk says nothing. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't frown. He doesn't meet their gaze. Then a third child, older, tries to startle him with a shout. The monk doesn't blink. The king watches quietly, his hands folded before him. Eventually, the children grow bored. One by one, they drift away. The last boy hesitates, lingers a moment, then scuffs his toe on the stone and walks off. You expect the monk to speak now, or at least sigh, or offer some small expression, but he doesn't. He just continues to sit, eyes soft, breath even. The king turns to you. That was the lesson. You glance at him. That he didn't react. He nods. We spend our lives catching arrows fired from others. Their opinions, their emotions, their projections. But this man, he gestures toward the monk. He lets them pass. You look at the monk again. His stillness, now radiant, rather than strange. The king tells a story. When I was younger, a monk came to visit my court. He was quiet, unfamiliar with our customs. One morning, while passing through the garden, a guard accused him of theft. The monk was holding a ripe peach he'd plucked from the palace tree. The guard shouted, threatened. The monk looked him in the eye and said nothing. Not anger, not defense, just silence. The guard struck him. You gasp softly. The king nods. Not hard, just enough to make a point. But the monk didn't flinch. He didn't resist. He simply bowed and walked away. Later that day, the guard fell ill. He came to me pale and trembling, thinking he was cursed. But the monk, he returned the next morning with a second peach and placed it on the guard's pillow. That was all. The Buddha once said, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. The king kneels beside the seated monk, now his voice tender. Some people think peace is passive, that silence is weak. But sometimes stillness is the sharpest blade. It cuts through illusion, expectation, even insult. The monk finally turns his head and looks at you. His eyes are warm, bottomless, like a well that only reflects kindness. He says softly, most people live like drums. They make noise every time someone strikes them. He pauses, then adds, but if you hollow yourself out just enough, there's nothing left to strike. You sit beside him, not to be wise, not to be impressive, just to see what it feels like to be still. The wind moves through the courtyard, brushing against your cheek like a slow breath. A bird calls once, then falls silent. Time thins. You're not meditating, you're not trying, you're just sitting. And in that stillness, you hear something, not a voice, not a thought, a quiet hum deep in the bones, like peace, whispering. You don't need to protect yourself from what passes through. The monk closes his eyes again, his breath unbroken. The king speaks one last time. There will always be shouting, judgment, doubt. But you don't have to carry it. You don't even have to touch it. Let it pass. And so you ask yourself gently, what would it feel like to not defend your worth, but to know it so deeply that no one else has to see it for it to be true? You lie back on the warm stone, your hands resting on your belly, the stars beginning to blink overhead. There is nothing to prove, no opinion to win, no voice to outmatch. just the hush of night and the quiet dignity of not being moved. Night deepens once again. The sky above the palace grounds has turned velvet black, pierced by stars, so steady they seem like tiny bells chiming with light. The king leads you beyond the walls, now into open land. There are no torches, no guards, no path, just the rhythm of your feet in the grass and the occasional call of a night bird. He walks like someone returning to a familiar emptiness. His stride is slow but sure. After some time, the trees thin and the desert begins. Not a dramatic sea of dunes, but a quiet stretch of sand and stone under the moon. The air is cooler here. Still, the king pauses and turns to you. Do you know how to walk without leaving a trace? He asks, his voice low, almost swallowed by the space around you. You don't answer. You wait. He continues. A woman once did. A wise woman who crossed this desert alone. No caravan, no maps, no markings, and yet no one could follow her. Not even the soldiers sent to hunt her down. You glance around at the soft sand. Your footprints are already faint behind you. They say she walked with such intention, such peace, that the earth never resisted her. Each step she took, the wind would gently erase it before the next fell. Some thought it was magic. Others thought it was mercy. He pauses, looking out at the wide silence. I think she simply had no need to be remembered. He begins walking again, and you follow. This time, he's barefoot. You take off your shoes too. The earth feels cool beneath your soles, textured like memory, coarse, dry, but somehow tender. He turns to you and says, "We are trained to make impressions in conversation, in work, in life. But what if your presence didn't need to leave a mark?" The Buddha once said, "As a bee gathers nectar without harming the flower, so too should the wise move through the world." And suddenly, it feels strange how much energy you've spent trying to be noticed, trying to be lasting, trying to be significant. The king tells more of the story. This woman, no one knew her name, but legend says she lived with a caravan briefly many years ago. She helped fix a broken wheel, shared her water with a sick child. Then, one morning, she was gone. He kneels down and touches the sand with his palm. But those who drank from the jug she left behind said the water never ran out. You stare at him. He smiles. Maybe that's just a story. Or maybe when someone moves through the world with so much gentleness, even the water listens. You both sit there for a while in the middle of nowhere. But it doesn't feel empty. It feels sacred. He places a small stone in the sand in front of him. Each time I come here, he says I leave a stone. and take one with me, but not to build anything, just to remember the exchange. You mimic his gesture. You find a stone, smooth, cool, and place it next to his. Then pick up a different one and tuck it into your pocket. It feels almost like prayer, but quieter, like worship stripped of language and left only with breath. He says, "The woman who left no footprints, she didn't disappear because she was afraid. She disappeared because she was free." You sit in silence again. The wind moves gently, picking up a few grains of sand, soft as breath. Your hair stirs. Your shoulders release. And without meaning to, you've slowed everything. Your pulse, your thoughts, your need to figure anything out. And you ask yourself, what if my presence is enough? Even when it leaves no trace. You remember emails you've sent that no one answered. Kindnesses no one noticed. Efforts that were never praised. And now, in this still desert, it all seems okay. You didn't need to be seen for it to matter. You needed to be real. The king lies down on his back, arms behind his head. Most people are chasing immortality, he says, looking at the stars. But I've found more peace in impermanence. You lie beside him. The stars seem closer now. Not like they're watching you, but like they're breathing with you. He turns his head slightly, not to look at you, but just to be near. If no one remembered your name, but the world was softer because you lived, would that be enough? You don't answer with words. You close your eyes and listen to the wind moving through nothing. Footprints already gone. Peace arriving. Step by step. You wake not to sound, but to stillness. The kind of hush that only lives between stars and sunrise. The sand is cool beneath you. The desert stretched around like a sleeping sea, and the sky above has begun to lighten, first with indigo, then with the faintest breath of rose. The king is already sitting up beside you, his shawl wrapped loosely around his shoulders, gaze fixed not on the horizon, but on the moon, still hanging like a question in the pale sky. He says nothing at first. Then my son used to be afraid of the dark. You turn toward him. His voice is gentler than usual this morning. There's something behind it, something softer than memory. He would cry out every time the lamps were put out. The king continues, we tried everything. Night lamps, stories, even a guard posted outside his door. But still, the fear clung to him like shadow. He smiles now, faint and far off, until the moon taught him otherwise. You settle beside him on the sand, wrapping your arms around your knees. One night, the king says he couldn't sleep again. I walked him outside, right out into the courtyard, where the jasmine blooms, and I pointed to the moon. The sky brightens just slightly as he speaks. The moon is fading, but not gone yet. Still present, still luminous. I told him, that's the same moon watching over you every night. It doesn't need to shout. It just stays. Quiet, still, and full of light. He picks up a small pebble and rolls it between his fingers. I asked him to wave to it. He did. And then I told him, whenever you feel afraid, just remember the moon is waving back. A long breath. After that, the king says he still woke some nights, but he stopped crying. He'd whisper to the window instead. "Hello, moon," the Buddha once said. Just as the moon sheds its light on all with detachment and equanimity, so should we shine our love. You look up at the last sliver of the moon before dawn fully claims the sky, and you feel something stirring in your chest. A softness, a longing maybe, or a remembering. Fear is so loud, but the moon, you realize, has always been quiet, and yet it's never left. The king turns to you. We talk a lot about letting go of fear, but maybe what we really need is to befriend it. He leans back on his elbows, watching the sky change color. I once asked my son what he thought fear looked like. He chuckles. He said, like a little creature with big eyes that gets bigger when you yell at it and smaller when you let it sit in your lap. You smile, because somehow that makes perfect sense. The king tells another tale, his voice so quiet, it feels like it's meant only for the space between your heartbeats. There was once a boy who lived in a village near a cliff. Every night he dreamed of falling, over and over. His parents told him not to worry. The village elders gave him charms. Still, the dream returned. One day, he climbed the cliff himself, sat right on the edge. His knees shook. His palms sweated. But he stayed. And after a while, the wind came, and with it a bird. It landed beside him. The boy asked, "Do you fall?" And the bird said, "Only when I stop flying." The king smiles at the memory. And from that night on, the boy's dream changed. He still fell, but now he had wings. You sit with that. Fear may never leave, but maybe it can shift. Maybe it can learn to fly. The king rises now, brushing the sand from his robes. The sun has begun to push over the horizon, the light soft and honey gold pouring across the land like a gentle tide. He reaches into his robe and pulls out a small cloth pouch. From it, he takes a smooth, round stone, pale as moonlight. I give this to those learning to speak gently to their sphere. He says, placing it in your hand. The stone is cool, heavy, but not burdensome. You feel it grounding you, like a reminder that being afraid and being still can coexist. He adds, don't throw it away. Hold it. when the fear visits again, and it will let this remind you that not everything loud is powerful, and not everything silent is weak. You close your fingers around the stone. It fits like it was made for you. As the sun climbs, the moon fades into the blue, but you know it hasn't gone. It's just resting, and you ask yourself quietly, what if I could meet my fear like a friend? Invite it to tea. Offer it a place by the fire and sit with it until it forgets how to roar. You walk with the king back toward the grove. Each step feels slower, deeper, like the land itself is teaching you how to walk softer. And behind your ribs, a new kind of courage begins to grow. Not loud, not proud, but real. The sun has climbed high, yet the king walks slowly, as if time doesn't chase him the way it does others. You follow him along a quiet path that cuts through the tall grass, the blades swaying in the soft wind, like monks bowing gently as you pass. It's a peaceful road, edged with the footprints of small animals and scattered with hoofprints that lead toward the royal stables. The scent of hay greets you before the buildings appear. Then come the soft snorts of horses, the occasional clink of metal, the thud of hooves on packed dirt. The stables are simple, not the ornate kind you'd expect of a king, but honest and weathered, real. Inside, a young stable boy works sweat glistening on his brow as he tries again and again to coax a dappled gray horse into motion. The animal doesn't move, doesn't flinch, just stares at him, unmoved, like a mountain with legs. The boy sees the king and bows quickly, then glances nervously at the horse. "She won't go," he mutters, "no matter what I do. Not even a step." The king watches, arms folded. "And what have you done?" The boy lists them off. "I pulled the lead, raised my voice, tapped her leg, rattled a bucket of oats. The horse flicks her ears lazily, utterly unconcerned." The king nods, then walks over slow as moonrise. He doesn't touch the horse, doesn't speak to her. He simply sits down in the straw a few feet away, cross-legged, still. You stand watching. 5 minutes pass. Then 10. The boy fidgets. "Should we?" The king holds up one hand gently. "Wait." The horse, curious, turns her head. She blinks, shifts her weight slightly, then only then takes one step forward. The king doesn't react. He just breathes. Another step, then another. The boy's mouth opens in surprise. "She moved," he whispers. The king finally speaks. "She didn't want force. She wanted company." He stands slowly, brushing straw from his robes. Not all things move on command. Some things move when they feel seen. He turns to the boy. Patience isn't waiting for someone to change. It's being present enough for them to want to. The Buddha once said, "Have compassion for all beings rich and poor alike. Each has their suffering. You look at the horse again. She's not stubborn. She's sensitive. She didn't resist because she was wild. She resisted because she was protecting herself from someone who didn't know how to slow down. The king walks with you, back toward the edge of the stable yard. He stops beside the fence, resting his arms on the top rail. I had a horse like that once, he says. Refused every rider. They called her cursed, dangerous. I believed them until one morning before dawn, I went to her stall without intent. I just sat. I didn't try to ride, didn't try to lead. I fell asleep in the straw. He chuckles. When I woke, she had placed her head in my lap. You let that image settle in your chest. There's power in stillness, he says. Not the power to control, but the power to be trusted. You walk in silence a while longer, passing a small field where other horses graze. One lies on its side in the grass, sun-warmed and relaxed, its chest rising and falling like a bellows. It reminds you of your own breath, how rarely you notice it, how often it's rushed, shallow. The king notices your gaze and says, "Even horses lie down when they feel safe." He tells another story, voice soft. There was once a farmer who couldn't get his ox to plow. He shouted. He lashed. Still, the ox would not move. Until one day, the farmer gave up, sat beside the animal, and cried, not out of frustration, but exhaustion. A stranger passed and asked, "Why are you crying?" The farmer said, "Because I finally realized I was never listening." And from that day on, he stopped forcing. He began asking, and the ox began walking. The king turns to you. Now, face quiet. What are you trying to force that simply needs your presence? You feel the question ripple through your body like a breeze. Where have you been yanking, pulling, demanding movement from others, from yourself? What would it feel like to sit in the straw instead, to stop commanding and start companioning? As you return to the grove, the wind has picked up, slightly teasing the leaves into gentle applause. The king kneels again beneath the tree and pulls a small wooden whistle from a pouch at his side. He blows it, once soft, low, almost inaudible. Moments later, a bird lands on a branch above, then another, then a third. He looks up and says simply, "They come not because I own them, but because I learned how to be still." And so you ask yourself, is effort always strength? Or is patience its quieter, wiser sibling? Sometimes you realize the path forward isn't paved with action, it's softened with presence. And in the gentle company of a horse, a boy and a king who knows how to wait, you learn how to stop running ahead of your own peace. The light this evening is honey soft, the kind that makes even old stones glow with warmth. The grove is quiet, wrapped in a hush that feels like a blessing. But tonight, something is different. There's movement in the air, a quiet urgency that isn't rushed, but steady, like footsteps in a prayer. The king walks beside you, with his hands behind his back. He hasn't spoken for a while. The silence between you isn't empty. It's thoughtful, as though the story he's about to tell is still choosing its words. He leads you to a small temple on the far edge of the village. It's simple, worn with time, but the candles still flicker in the window, and incense coils like smoke, rising from the earth to the stars. Beside the temple is a bell, cracked but still whole, and beside the bell sits an old monk, eyes closed, hands resting on a wooden bowl. The king nods at him and then turns to you. "This bowl," he says, "fed an entire village during a famine." You blink, surprised. He gestures for you to sit, and then as the monk opens his eyes and gives a slow, peaceful smile, the king begins. "There was once a season of drought," he says. "The rivers shrank, the crops withered, and the air grew hot and sharp, like cracked glass. People grew afraid, then hungry, then angry." He pauses, picking up a small stone and turning it in his palm. "One morning, this monk came down from the hills with nothing but a bowl. He walked to the village square, sat in the sun, and placed the bowl in front of him. He didn't speak. He didn't beg. He simply waited." The king smiles faintly, watching the monk now as he did then. At first, people ignored him, then mocked him. "What good is a bowl when there's nothing to put in it?" they said. You can imagine it. That empty bowl, resting like hope in the dust. But then the king continues. "A child walked by with a single apricot, shriveled but still sweet. He placed it in the bowl. Then a woman with a small handful of rice. A man offered 2 almonds. Another a pinch of dried herbs." He looks up at the fading sky. By sunset, the bowl was full. You wait, expecting that to be the miracle. But the king leans closer. "Here's the part no one understands," he says. "That bowl never emptied. No matter how many people came, it filled and filled and filled." You glance toward the monk. He's still smiling, like someone who knows a secret, but isn't in a hurry to share it. The king continues, his voice softer now. "I was skeptical too. I thought it was legend or sleight of hand. But I came one night late, hungry. I'd been fasting to understand my people's pain. I sat beside him. He offered me rice from the bowl. It tasted like sunlight. You close your eyes, imagining it. A bowl that never empties. A monk who never speaks. A miracle that began with stillness. The Buddha once said, "Thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened." The king sighs gently. I asked the monk days later how it worked. He said, "The bowl is only as empty as the person offering to it." You sit with that. How often have you believed you had nothing left to give? How often have you waited to feel full before offering yourself to the world? But maybe it's not about being full. Maybe it's about being open. The king tells another story, smaller this time. There was once a man who carried a flask during drought. He rationed every drop, sipping only when he was sure no one was watching. One day, he saw a woman collapse from thirst. He hesitated, but then gave her the last of his water. He pauses. The next morning, he woke beside a stream that hadn't flowed in months. You look up, eyes wide. Was it magic, you ask? The king shrugs. Maybe. Or maybe the world just responds to those who stop acting like they're alone. He stands now, stretching his arms behind him. That bowl taught me something no throne ever did. When I stop guarding what I think is mine, something wider moves through me. He gestures back toward the monk, who now offers the bowl toward a young girl passing by. She hesitates, then drops a small flower inside. Not food, but beauty. And somehow, that feels enough. So you ask yourself gently, what are you keeping to yourself out of fear? There's not enough time, love, energy, kindness. What if giving doesn't deplete you, but deepens you? The king walks slowly back toward the grove, his hands empty, but his presence full. And you realize you may never see the bottom of that bowl because maybe it doesn't have one. The moon is rising again, fat and pale, a soft lantern for those who still wander. You're walking with the king now, just the two of you, beneath the same old tree. Its bark smells of time. The wind rustles the leaves with a hush, like a grandmother brushing hair back from your face. The king doesn't say anything for a long while. He just sits, legs crossed, his hands resting lightly in his lap. His eyes are half closed, not closed like sleep, but like someone turning inward to listen for a quieter voice. You join him, not out of politeness, but because it feels right. You breathe in like a wave returning, out like a leaf falling. No goal, no image to hold, just breath. After a time, he speaks not to fill the silence, but as part of it. I come here, he says, to hear what doesn't speak. His voice is quiet, but it doesn't feel small. I used to meditate inside the palace. He continues. Golden cushions, perfume in the air, the sound of distant music. But it was all too much. He opens his eyes slowly. The real silence wasn't there. It was out here, beneath this tree, where even the air forgets your name. You nod, though your body is too still to move much. I remember the first time I truly sat here, he says. No guards, no robes, no titles, just me and the earth. He gestures to the ground beneath him, his fingers brushing the moss. I thought I'd feel lost, but I felt found. The Buddha once said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Here in this stillness, you feel the truth of that. There's no sermon here, no lesson wrapped in cleverness, just presence, just being. You shift slightly, letting your spine grow tall, your belly soften, your jaw unclench. You hadn't noticed you were clenching. The king smiles at you. Not encouragement, just sharing the space. He tells a story then, like placing a pebble into a still pond. There was once a man who asked a sage, "How do I find wisdom?" The sage led him to a pond and told him to stir the water. "What do you see?" the sage asked. The man looked. Nothing, only ripples. Then the sage said, "Now wait." And so the man sat. The water slowly stilled. And there in the quiet, his reflection returned. You both sit with that for a while. You realize how often your own mind is stirred by thought, by worry, by noise. How rarely you let the waters settle long enough to see what's beneath. The king picks up a fallen leaf, rubs it between his fingers. Silence, he says, is not the absence of sound. It's the absence of self-chatter. You smile slightly, understanding now why this tree is his refuge. He tells another tale. Shorter. There was a woman who never stopped talking. Not out of arrogance, but fear. She feared what would surface if she stopped. One day, her voice gave out completely. She sat in a garden for a week. And in that silence, she met herself for the first time. The wind passes softly between you both, cool and clean. You close your eyes, and slowly, something inside you loosens. Like an old and finally given permission to untie itself. No instructions, no technique. Just the willingness to sit, to be. The king's voice comes again, almost as breath. I've seen the loudest generals tremble when asked to sit in silence for 1 hour. I've seen beggars laugh and sages weep. Silence is the mirror that doesn't flatter. He leans back against the tree and closes his eyes again. So you follow. In the darkness behind your lids, there's a kind of light, not seen, but felt. There's a sound, too. Not a noise, exactly. More like a presence. The way a room feels when someone kind walks in. You don't hear them, but you know. You lose track of time. You don't drift. You rest. And when you open your eyes again, the stars have shifted. The king is still beside you, breathing slowly. And you feel more full than if you'd eaten, more clear than if you'd spoken. You realize then you've been trying to hear truth in words. But truth lives in the quiet space between them. You ask yourself, is silence empty? Or is it what I've been running from all along? And maybe, just maybe, running from silence, is the only thing that keeps you from peace. The king doesn't rise yet, neither do you. You just breathe, and in that breath, something ancient recognizes you again.